Good afternoon. The NATO Secretary General and the National Security Advisor of the United States will make short statements, and then we'll have time for questions. Secretary General.
Good afternoon. I've just chaired a meeting of national security advisors from all NATO allies, and I'm glad to be joined today by US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. Jake, it's good to see you again, just after we met in Washington last week. In our meeting today, NATO allies discussed our preparations for the Washington summit in July, including Ukraine, deterrence and defense, and the growing challenge posed by China. Today, allies reiterated their support for Ukraine. This is not charity, it is in our own security interest. A Russian victory would weaken us and embolden not just Moscow, but also China, Iran and North Korea. That matters for Europe's security, and it matters for America's security. By spending a fraction of our military budgets, we have helped Ukraine to destroy a substantial part of Russia's combat capacity. Our support is also an example of true transatlantic burden sharing, where both Europe and North America are making critical contributions to preserve Ukraine's freedom. Last week in Washington, I heard strong support for Ukraine from congressional leaders, both Republicans and Democrats. The debate continues in Washington on funding for a number of important priorities. It is vital that the United States Congress agrees on continued support for Ukraine in the near future, and I count on all allies to sustain their commitment. Today, we also discussed further bolstering NATO's deterrence and defense. At the summit, we will demonstrate that we are delivering on our commitments, including by fully resourcing our new defense plans, investing in new capabilities, and accelerating efforts to strengthen our transatlantic defense industrial base. Since last July, NATO has agreed industry deals worth some $10 billion for ammunition, including $5.5 billion for 1,000 more Patriot air defense missiles just last month. A deal that will build more production capacity in Europe for this vital capability. The world has become more dangerous, but NATO has become stronger, with more forces, higher readiness, and increased defense investment. We can never take peace for granted, but we do not see any imminent threat against any NATO ally. NATO is now holding Steadfast Defender, our biggest military exercise in decades. Our exercise demonstrates that there should be no room for miscalculation in Moscow about NATO's readiness and resolve to protect all allies. In our meeting today, we also addressed the growing challenge posed by China. Our competitors are increasingly joining forces, and Russia's increasing cooperation with China, Iran and North Korea raises serious concerns. So it's even more important that NATO is working more closely with partners like Australia, Japan, New Zealand and South Korea. Today, we also condemned Iran's destabilizing role throughout the Middle East, including its support for terror groups that attack allied forces and civilian shipping. Attacks by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria against US forces are unacceptable. Iran must rein in its proxies. So, dear Jake, thank you again for your strong personal commitment to our alliance and for the extraordinary leadership of the United States and President Biden as we face global challenges. Together in NATO, we will continue to protect our nations, our people and our values. And we all look forward to the summit in Washington. So please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for convening this meeting of Allied National Security Advisors, our second under the Biden administration. And today was really the first high-level opportunity to begin planning the substance of the Washington summit, and it will continue with the defense ministers next week. The United States looks forward to welcoming our allies to Washington this summer to celebrate the 75th birthday of NATO but also to showcase the fact that the NATO alliance is bigger, stronger, and more united than it has ever been. We covered the full range of issues, and you heard the Secretary General lay out much of what was discussed today. I just want to highlight a few that will be front and center as we head towards Washington in July. The first, of course, is our shared support for Ukraine. Putin has been counting on dividing this alliance, but today we heard again total unity and a degree of intensity of that unity that has not flagged one bit since the beginning of this brutal invasion by Russia nearly 2 years ago. Putin has also been counting on flagging support. Today I heard renewed commitments from many different NATO allies of tangible support for the brave Ukrainians who are defending their country. And as President Biden said yesterday, he is going to drive hard until we deliver a bipartisan package of support for Ukraine from the United States. And as allies, we're committed not just to supporting Ukraine in the current fight, but also supporting Ukraine's long-term deterrence capacity as it works towards becoming a NATO member. And in that regard, we had good discussions today in planning for the NATO summit on the types of practical support that NATO can provide to Ukraine. Second, on burden sharing. At Washington, we look forward to seeing more allies than ever reach the 2% benchmark, a high water mark for the type of burden sharing that has been at the heart of the vision of NATO since the Wales summit 10 years ago. Third, on the defense industrial base, we've learned over the past 2 years that we really need to energize our production of critical capabilities. And we want to highlight progress in this area, but also further work to do in Washington. And it's not just about total numbers, it's also about the types of capabilities that we need to be investing in, because this fight over the last 2 years has taught us about the evolving nature of technology and warfare, and NATO has to stay at the cutting edge in that regard. Fourth, on deterrence and defense posture. At Vilnius last year, we developed as an alliance new regional plans, and by Washington, we need to demonstrate that those plans are executable, and we discussed today the steps necessary to ensure that happens, including things like the Steadfast Defender exercise the Secretary General referenced. Then there's the deepening ties with our Indo-Pacific partners. This is not about bringing NATO to Asia. It is about working together with like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific on challenges that really transcend geography, cyber, economic security, nuclear proliferation, and yes, the evolving interconnections between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, among other issues. We also, as the Secretary General noted, had the opportunity today to discuss the situation in the Middle East, including the threat that Iran poses to regional stability and to a vision of a more peaceful, prosperous, interconnected region. Before I conclude, let me also just say that we very much look forward to welcoming Sweden into the alliance very soon. It's past time that they join as the 32nd member, and we look forward to welcoming them as the 32nd member when we welcome all of the other allies in Washington this summer. So, Mr. Secretary General, let me just say we are so much looking forward to the Washington summit. We see the vibrancy, the vitality, the dynamism in this alliance. We saw that on display today. We see that on display every day as we support Ukraine, as we stand up to Russian aggression, as we deal with the myriad challenges facing our alliance on a 360-degree basis. And with that, let me turn it back to you.